Hey, what's up? It's Kyle Henderson, BamaInsider.com. Today, I'm talking about the Alabama defensive line after Alabama put together a fantastic class in 2020. I know they didn't get McKinnley Jackson, and you're probably wondering about the defensive line now going forward as you look to the fulfillment pieces of the 2020 class. But mind you, Alabama finished third in the Rivals.com recruiting rankings. So I think overall, when you look at the fact that Alabama didn't get McKinnley Jackson, which would have boosted them to the #1 spot on the Rivals.com rankings, the class is still very dynamic and still has some very talented defensive linemen. Pair that with the defensive lineman Alabama has returning to the 2020 season. I think Alabama is going to be just fine when you look at the front seven. So let's talk about the defensive line right now, a little bit more in depth. And of course, you can read more on the Alabama defensive line today by going to BamaInsider.com. Remember, the free promo code is simply Roll Tide. Now, when we look at the defensive line, we see that Alabama has, as true freshman, Jamil Burroughs, who just signed on signing day. They're going to have Jamar Latham. You're going to have Timothy Smith, who is a fantastic addition. And then the two redshirts from the 2019 season, Braylon Ingram and Ismail Sopsher. A lot of people expecting a lot from both of those players, especially a player like Ismail Sopsher, because Ismail Sopsher, I think, is a guy, when he first got to Alabama, a lot of excitement being that he's that defensive tackle that could potentially fill a void. But DJ Delo, who we're going to talk about next, really stepped up and showed that he's capable of being Alabama's next big interior defensive tackle. So it actually worked out better because Ismail Sopsher got a year under his belt, going to get some more time with Scott Cochran. And this coming season, we're all expecting Ismail Sopsher to really make a splash. So when you look at the freshmen, you have 5 freshmen in that defensive line room that are just going to be freshmen. Now, when we look to the sophomore group, you have Christian Barmore, DJ Dell, as mentioned, Justin Ebogbe, Stephon Wynn, and Byron Young. Very experienced group, being that they're just sophomores. And the thing I like about Christian Barmore, and we've talked about it again and again, he played like a man on fire towards the end of the season. He was a guy who proved that he can get after the quarterback, a guy that can chase down running backs, really a guy that played with that alpha mentality that you're looking for in the defensive line unit. And I think that's something that Alabama did lack during the 2019 season. I felt that Raekwon Davis, even though he had those natural intangibles, 6'7", 315, I felt that he lacked that killer instinct when Alabama needed it most. Now, I'm not saying that Raekwon Davis had a bad season. I just think it was a very underwhelming season in terms of what he could have done during his senior season at Alabama. Now, when you look at Christian Barmore, he's still looking for that ink. He's still looking for that notoriety. Still has that fire, that hunger. Now, is it going to transition to the 2020 season? Well, we're about to find out. When you look at other guys in that sophomore room, you got DJ Dell. As we mentioned, he's a guy who really stepped up towards the beginning of the season, but I think he needs to prove that he can stay healthy. Because towards the end of the season, he was a guy who was really banged up, a guy that missed a couple games because he wasn't in the shape that he wanted to be, that Nick Saban needed him to be. So there's good depth within that defensive line unit, young depth, and the guys who are going to be starting are going to be young. Now, Alabama does have 2 juniors who are going to be very impactful this year, Vidarian Mathis and LeBrian Ray. A lot of people forget about LeBrian Ray because he was injured last season, right? He's dealt with that foot injury. But I think a healthy LeBrian Ray will be very impactful for Alabama's defensive line unit. So let's look at the defensive line overall. You could have LeBrian Ray as a defensive end. You could have Christian Barmore as a D end or a D tackle. You could have DJ Dell. And then you could have a couple other guys in the mix. You could have a Justin Ebogbe, a Byron Young. You could have a young guy step up. So there's a lot of talent within this room, and I think Alabama is going to be fine going forward. And that's why I wanted to come on here and talk about Alabama missing out on McKinnley Jackson, while it might not affect Alabama too much because the Alabama Crimson side has plenty of depth. It's not experienced depth, but I don't think it's really going to matter because the talent within this room is dynamic. And another exclamation point within this room is Alabama's working with Freddie Roach. Freddie Roach just announced on staff by the Alabama Crimson Tide. And think about this. You have someone who's coming back to work with the players that's already been at Alabama, already gone through the process. I know he wasn't a defensive lineman per se, but he's a guy that can teach the players technique and getting to the quarterback, getting pressure on the quarterback, making the right calls up front in the trenches. And I think that's going to be very prosperous for these players because he's going to be able to connect very well. Now, I think Freddie Roach has a lot to prove in terms of his recruiting ability. I think he's going to fare well in that. I know he jumped on late. He's done some recruiting late for Alabama, but I don't think he's had enough time. So you have Freddie Roach taking over for Brian Baker. I think it's a monumental pickup for Nick Saban in terms of his on-the-field coaching ability and also his recruiting ability. So again, Freddie Roach takes over for Brian Baker. Sal Sinceri still on the roster. Pete Golding still on the roster. And Charles Kelly, Carl Scott, all those particular coaches make up what I feel is a very good defensive staff. I know a lot of people talk about the lack of experience last year and how it affected Alabama's defense, and especially when you talk about Pete Golding. Now, Pete Golding has become somewhat of the scapegoat for Alabama, right? It's almost came to the point where something bad happens to Alabama, blame Pete Golding. Alabama wants to see improvements. I get that. You want to see improvements. I get that. Nick Saban has continued to defend Pete Golding. Otherwise, he would have already made a change. I mean, we're already 1 month away from spring football, and Pete Golding is still the defensive coordinator. With Alabama returning so much talent on the defensive side of the football, and we'll talk about the linebackers on another segment. But as we end this segment, let's talk about the linebackers just real quick. Dylan Moses is going to be returning. You have two linebackers who played last year, Christian Harris and Shane Lee. Those guys should have a wealth of experience coming back. You also have Joshua McMillan, who qualified for another redshirt season after being injured last season. Both Moses and Josh McMillan suffered ACL, so both of those guys will be back. Could the front seven be much more improved? We're going to see. And a lot has to do with the outside linebacker play. You know, Alabama's losing Terrell Lewis. They're losing Anthony Jennings. So young guys are going to really have to step up. Ben Davis is now a senior at Alabama. Will he ever get on the field? I know everyone's asking about that. Chris Allen, is it going to be the year that he rises up and proves that he can get to the quarterback? King Makuta, Jerez Parks, those are the sophomores when we look at the depth chart. The freshmen, William Anderson, Chris Boswell, who's a 5-star, Kevin Harris, Quidarian Robinson, and Drew Sanders are also freshmen within this unit. So Alabama has a very good front seven. I know you guys wanted McKinnley Jackson on board, but as I just spoke about, I think there's enough talent within this front seven to make Alabama's defense more potent in 2020. I appreciate you guys watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. We'll catch you soon at BamaInsider.com.